Caroline let out a soft, humorless laugh. So this is revenge? No, he said, this is strategy and optics. She looked down at her hands. I'm not some rich man's toy. I know, he said quietly. That's why I'm asking you. The way he said it made her pause. There was something underneath his words, something bruised and carefully hidden. A wound, perhaps, wrapped in Armani and sealed by silence. She took a slow breath. If I say yes, there are conditions. Of course, no touching, no assumptions, and absolutely no stories that imply I belong to you. His mouth twitched, barely noticeable. Agreed. And I choose the dress. He gave a small nod. Within reason. Caroline studied him. He didn't look like a man who was used to being told no. But he didn't flinch under her gaze. He didn't leer. He didn't beg. He simply waited. And maybe that's what made her say yes. 3 days later, she stood in front of a mirror she didn't recognize, wearing a dress that shimmered like crushed champagne under the lights. Her hair was swept up, her lips tinted. Rose, and for the first time in years, she looked like someone from another life. Lucas had arranged everything. Discreet stylists, a car service, a private fitting room far from the eyes of the Marigold staff. As she adjusted an earring, the door opened behind her. You clean up well, he said. She turned, raising an eyebrow. Careful. That almost sounded like a compliment. He walked toward her slowly, eyes scanning her without heat. Just intention. Tonight, he said, you are the woman everyone wishes they had the courage to speak to. She laughed softly. That's a lot of pressure for someone who usually scrubs bathtubs. You're more than that, he replied, without blinking. Whether you see it or not. The car ride to the venue was quiet but not tense. Lucas wasn't the type to make small talk. He sat beside her, composed, hands folded over his lap. But Caroline noticed how his fingers tapped against his knee as if trying to keep time with something that couldn't be heard. When they arrived, the press lights flared. Photographers turned. And Lucas Blackwood, the man known for avoiding, the spotlight, stepped out of the car with a woman no one could place. Caroline took his arm because it was expected, because it was part of the deal. But when he looked at her just once under the soft lights, there was something in his eyes that made her forget everything else. This wasn't love. It wasn't even attraction. It was two broken people choosing not to be alone for one night. And as they walked into the wedding, past the gasps and whispers and carefully concealed envy, Caroline realized something strange. She didn't feel small. She felt seen. The Crestwood estate sat like a jewel in the countryside outside Savannah, its white columned grandeur soaked in golden afternoon light. Rows of luxury vehicles lined the gravel drive, valets darting between them like well-trained dancers. It was a setting built for appearances, for spectacle, for declarations of permanence, even if most of them were built on sand. Inside the estate's ballroom, where soft jazz floated from a string quartet and glasses of imported champagne clinked like polite applause, Caroline Rivera stepped through the arched entrance on the arm of Lucas Blackwood and stole the air from the room. She had been warned by stylists, prepared by professionals, but nothing could have braced her for the sheer force of being looked at like this. Not as a maid, not as someone blending into the wallpaper of other people's lives, but as someone worth stopping for. The gown Lucas had chosen, a silk off-shoulder number in deep garnet, moved like smoke against her skin. Her hair was a simple twist at the nape of her neck, exposing the fine lines of her collarbones. There were no diamonds, no flashy statement pieces. And yet, the hush that followed her steps said everything. Lucas didn't speak as they entered. He didn't have to. His presence alone was a storm in still water. But as they passed through the crowd, he leaned in just slightly, his breath brushing her ear. They're watching. Don't look for him yet. She nodded, pulse thudding too loud in her chest. I wasn't. They circled the room once, pausing, to accept greetings from strangers who addressed Lucas with reverence and curiosity. Caroline kept her smile polite, her posture poised. She had rehearsed every gesture, every angle. Still, nothing could mask the quiet tremor in her fingertips. Then she saw him. Nathan Wolfe was standing at the far end of the ballroom, his back partially turned, talking to an older gentleman in a blue velvet blazer. He was dressed in classics. Black, his tie perfectly knotted, his posture unmistakable. But when he turned, his eyes found her instantly, as if pulled by a string buried in his chest. He froze. Caroline felt it like a slap of wind across her face. For a moment, she wasn't. A carefully packaged illusion. She was the girl who had cried herself to sleep wondering what she had done wrong. The girl who begged the universe for a sign, for closure, for some scrap of dignity after he vanished. Now he was standing a room away with Miranda Crestwood on his arm and astonishment flickering in his eyes. Caroline lifted her chin and took Lucas's arm more firmly. Her voice came out even. "Let's say hello." Lucas gave the barest nod, then walked with her across the floor, each step echoing louder in her mind than the music. "Nathan," she said smoothly as they stopped a few feet away. He blinked. "Caroline, I didn't expect to see me," she finished, her smile brittle. "It's your wedding weekend. Shouldn't surprises be part of the package?" Miranda turned with a smile too tight for comfort. Her gaze raked over Caroline, then flicked to Lucas. "You're with Lucas Blackwood?" Lucas extended his hand coolly. "It's a pleasure." Nathan took a beat too long to recover. "I didn't realize you two... We've been seeing each other for a while," Lucas said, eyes trained forward. "But we prefer privacy." Miranda laughed too brightly. "Well, now that the cat's out of the bag, I'm sure you'll be the talk of the evening." Caroline's eyes didn't leave Nathan's face. "You look good, Nathan. Congratulations." He opened his mouth to respond, but she was already turning away, Lucas guiding her back into the crowd. As they stepped into a quieter corner, Caroline exhaled sharply, tension unwinding in her shoulders like a long-held breath. "You held your ground," Lucas said quietly. "I didn't come here to crawl." "No," he said, "you didn't." Later, as dinner was served and couples danced beneath a canopy of crystal chandeliers, Caroline found herself standing by the garden doors, nursing a glass of water, trying to slow her thoughts. Lucas approached with a folded napkin and a wry smile. "You've barely touched your food. I wasn't hungry. You didn't seem like someone who needed armor." She looked at him. "Don't let the dress fool you." He tilted his head slightly. "Does this feel like revenge yet?" She gave a short, quiet laugh. "No, it feels like surviving with style." He studied her, the lines of his face unreadable. "That's not nothing." They danced once. Not for show, no cameras lingered, no eyes followed. Just the two of them, under softer light, moving to the rhythm of something neither dared to name. Caroline's hands rested on Lucas's shoulders, unsure at first, then steadier. His palms found the small of her back, gentle but sure. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. When the music faded and they returned to their table, Nathan was there, waiting. "Can I have a moment with you?" he asked, voice low. Lucas stood immediately. "I'll be nearby." Caroline followed Nathan out into the hall, where the noise was muffled by walls and chandeliers. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't. You look different." "People change," she said flatly. Nathan stepped closer, the scent of his cologne, sharp and familiar. "Is it real? You and Lucas?" Caroline met his eyes. "Why does it matter?" He hesitated. "Because I made a mistake. I left because I didn't think I could give you what you wanted. A future, stability." "Don't dress it up, Nathan. You left because you wanted more than what I was." "That's not true." She crossed her arms. "You didn't call. You didn't explain. You disappeared. I didn't know how to face you." "Then it's good you're getting married," she said coolly. "You've got a lot of practice in running." His mouth opened, but she didn't wait for more. She turned and walked away, her heels striking the marble like punctuation. When she returned to Lucas's side, he looked at her carefully. "You all right?" "Yes." "Did you get what you needed?" Caroline thought for a moment, then nodded. "I think I did." He didn't press further, just offered his hand. "Ready to leave?" She took it. And in that simple gesture, under the chandeliers of a world she never belonged to, she finally took back the parts of herself she thought she had lost. The weeks that followed the wedding should have marked the end of Caroline's arrangement with Lucas. That had been the plan. One night, one performance, a clean break. But the world had other ideas. Within days, photos of them from the wedding surfaced in digital tabloids and social media gossip columns. Speculation spiraled. Who was the mysterious woman on Lucas Blackwood's arm? Was the billionaire finally off the market? Caroline watched the frenzy unfold from the break room at the Marigold Grand Hotel. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, her uniform wrinkled after another long shift. On her phone screen, her face was splashed across gossip sites with Headlines that didn't quite say her name, but whispered just enough to sting. She was no longer invisible, and she wasn't sure she liked it. Maya tossed a magazine on the table. "You're trending. Does this mean you're quitting?" Caroline shook her head. "It wasn't supposed to last past the wedding." Maya raised an eyebrow. "So why is he still calling you?" Caroline didn't answer. Because she didn't have one. Lucas hadn't pressed for anything. He didn't lure her with more money or try to extend the contract. He simply asked with unsettling calm if she'd accompany him to a charity event in Charleston the following weekend. It was for a cause he supported, education access for underserved communities. Her presence, he claimed, would help soften his image. She wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or exploited, but something deeper pulled at her. A curiosity, a need. And maybe, just maybe, the part of her that had started to feel something real under all the pretending. She said yes. Charleston greeted them with salt-kissed air and cobbled streets. The event was held at a repurposed church-turned-community center, a far cry from the opulence of the Crestwood wedding. There were no chandeliers, no velvet ropes. Just rows of folding chairs, tables of local food, and children darting through the halls with paint on their fingers. Caroline hadn't expected to feel at home. Lucas watched her as she knelt beside a little girl struggling to draw a butterfly. He stood across the room, hands in his pockets, saying little as always. But his eyes never left her. There was something unreadable in his expression, more contemplative than cold. When she finally stood and crossed to him, she gestured at the murals lining the walls. "Did you sponsor all this?" "I funded the building's restoration. A few friends handled programming." "You don't strike me as someone who works with kids." "I don't," he said simply. "But they remind me that not everything has to be calculated." Caroline tilted her head. That almost sounded like a confession. He gave a soft exhale, nearly a laugh. "It's easier to do good in silence." "You mean without the risk of getting attached?" He looked at her, and for the first time since they met, his walls slipped. Attachment complicates things. Maybe that's the point. They didn't speak again until dinner, seated beside each other at a long banquet table under string lights. The air was warm, the chatter light. Caroline sipped her drink and caught him staring at the sky. "You're a hard man to read." "That's intentional." "Why?" "Because being understood is dangerous." Caroline turned to him fully. "Is that what happened with your ex-fiancée? She understood you too well?" Lucas's jaw tightened. He set down his glass. "She understood my money. My access, not me." "So what are you afraid people will see if they look past all that?" He didn't answer. They returned to the hotel in silence. Not awkward, just full, like there were too many truths floating between them, and neither wanted to be the first to name them. In her room, Caroline stood by the window, watching the waves roll into Charleston Harbor. A knock startled her. Lucas stepped inside, holding her shawl. "You left this." She reached for it, their fingers brushing. She expected him to retreat, to disappear behind his usual mask. But he stayed. "I told myself this wouldn't happen," he said softly. "What?" "That I wouldn't care if you walked away." Her breath caught. "And now?" she whispered. "I don't know what scares me more," he said. "Wanting you to stay or knowing I have nothing to offer if you do." Caroline's voice was barely audible. "You offered me peace at a time when all I felt was broken." He stepped closer. "I offered you a transaction." She shook her head. "You offered me dignity. You looked at me like I mattered." Lucas's hand lifted slowly, then hovered at her cheek before he withdrew it. "I don't want to ruin this," he said. "Then don't," she replied. But before either could say more, Caroline's phone buzzed. She turned to it, the screen, lighting with a name she hadn't seen in years. Her sister, she answered quickly. "Caroline," Daniela's voice cracked. "It's Mom. She collapsed this morning. They've taken her to the hospital." The room spun. Charleston vanished. The charity event. The soft air, the silent confessions. Only panic remained. "I have to go," she said, grabbing her bag. Lucas followed her into the hallway. "I'll come with you." "No," her voice was firm. "You've already done enough." He hesitated. "Caroline," but she was already gone, vanishing into the elevator, into the night, into the life she'd tried so hard to escape, but now had no choice but to face. The return to Savannah was quiet, unannounced, almost stealth-like in how Caroline slipped back into the city she had once tried so desperately to leave behind. Her mother was stable now, conscious, recovering, her breath thinner than before but steady. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and blooming lilies someone had dropped off without a note. Daniela had taken the night shift, staying beside their mother's bed with crossword puzzles and quiet humming. Caroline wandered the streets after visiting hours, unsure of what to do with herself. The air was thick with memory. Savannah never let go of its ghosts. It layered them like moss on stone, letting them cling and whisper long after you thought they'd gone. She walked past the Marigold Grand but didn't go inside. The lobby. Light flickered, just like always, and for a brief moment she could almost see her former self inside, wiping down polished counters and stealing glances at a man who didn't yet know her name. She didn't call Lucas. He hadn't reached out since Charleston. She told herself she was grateful for that, grateful for space, for silence, for the ability to think. But in truth, she missed his presence like a limb. That absence echoed louder than the voice of her past, which arrived 3 days later in a cafe on Liberty Street. She had gone there out of habit, not expectation. The place hadn't changed. Same brick walls, same dusty books lining the shelves. The moment she stepped inside, she knew he was there. Nathan sat at the corner table with his phone beside a half-drunk cup of coffee. He looked older, leaner around the jaw, a little more tense in the shoulders. But his eyes were exactly as she remembered. Warm, searching, and full of the kind of regret that came too late to be useful. She didn't try to hide when he looked up. She walked over, not because she wanted to see him, but because she needed to stop flinching at his memory. "Didn't expect to see you back in town," he said, standing awkwardly as she approached. "I'm not here for long. I heard about your mom." "I'm sorry," Caroline nodded. "Thank you." He gestured to the seat across from him. She hesitated, then sat. Just for a moment, Nathan studied her. "You look different." "I feel different. You're with Blackwood now?" She folded her hands on the table. "Why does that matter?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked down, fiddling with his cup. "I made mistakes, Caroline." She said nothing. "I panicked. Back then. I didn't know how to handle us, how serious it got. You were so real, and everything else in my life felt like performance. I wasn't ready." "That's the best you can do?" she asked, her voice soft but unwavering. "You ghosted me, left me feeling disposable. And now you want to rewrite the script like you were just scared?" He leaned forward. "I never stopped thinking about you." "That's not love," she said. "That's guilt." Nathan's voice dropped. "And what about him? Lucas? You really believe that man knows how to love someone like you?" She laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was also predictable. "Someone like me?" she repeated. "Say it, Nathan. A maid? A girl from nowhere?" "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did. You always did. That's why you left." She stood before he could speak again. "Don't reach out. Don't wait for me to come around. I'm not looking backward anymore." When she stepped outside, the air hit her like a cleansing wave. It didn't matter that she was trembling. It didn't matter that her eyes stung. What mattered was that she hadn't folded. She had said what needed saying, but clarity doesn't come without cost. That night, Caroline sat alone in her mother's kitchen, staring at the quiet hum of the fridge, and she knew she had to see Lucas. Not for closure, not for longing, but because silence could only stretch so far before it became cowardice. She found him exactly where she expected, on the rooftop terrace of his downtown penthouse, the city lights flickering beneath a velvet sky. He was leaning on the railing, a glass of bourbon in his hand, the other arm draped casually over the steel bar. She didn't speak right away, just watched him, letting the night settle between them. When he finally turned, his face was unreadable. Then he saw her and froze, tension flickering through his posture like lightning before the thunder. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again," he said. "I wasn't sure either." Lucas set down the glass. "How's your mother?" "Improving. Slowly." He nodded, as if that mattered to him more than he would admit. Caroline stepped closer. "I saw Nathan." Lucas's expression didn't change. He wanted to rewrite everything, pretend he was just afraid. "And what did you tell him?" "That I don't belong to that version of myself anymore." Silence stretched. She walked to the edge of the terrace and looked over the city. Then without turning, she said, "Do you want to know what scared me the most?" He waited. That I would confuse pretending with something real. That I wouldn't know the difference. That this, whatever it was, would hollow me out like everything else that came before. Lucas moved beside her. And now? She looked at him fully. Now I know the difference. And I know what I felt wasn't fiction. His eyes didn't waver. Neither was mine. They stood in the hush of that confession, not touching, not rushing, just breathing in the space that now felt like their own. "I'm tired of running," she whispered. "I'm tired of being alone," he said. Caroline reached for his hand. He took it gently like it was sacred. And in that moment, under Savannah's sleeping sky, they let go of the act. This time, it was real. Austin, Texas greeted Caroline Rivera with the strange quiet of unfamiliar beginnings. The city was both smaller and louder than she remembered. Streets filled with the buzz of people and music, but echoing with the kind of anonymity she craved. Her bus arrived just after dawn, when the morning was still brushing the skyline with color and the air was cool enough to carry a sense of possibility. Daniela opened the door to their childhood home with a look that wasn't quite surprise and not quite welcome. It had been years since they had spoken beyond brief phone calls and messages about their mother's worsening health. The silence between them wasn't angry. It was wounded, the kind that grew from too many disappointments and not enough truth. "You look tired," Daniela said, her tone neither warm nor cold. "I am," Caroline replied. They didn't hug. Instead, Daniela stepped aside and let her in, like someone allowing a storm to pass through. The house was smaller than Caroline remembered. The ceilings lower, the kitchen more cramped. Or maybe she had simply grown beyond it. Still, there was a familiarity in the scuffed floors, the squeaky cabinet hinges, the old photograph of their mother on the hallway wall, young, radiant, laughing in a way Caroline hadn't seen in years. She dropped her bags in the guest room and sat on the edge of the twin bed, feeling like she'd stumbled back into a life she'd once tried to rewrite. For the next few days, she didn't leave the house. She helped Daniela with errands, organized medical bills, tried to make herself useful without drawing attention. Her phone remained quiet. Lucas hadn't reached out and she didn't text him either. She told herself it was better this way, that what they'd shared had run its course and been what it needed to be, brief, beautiful, unfinished. But late at night, when the world was quiet and she was alone, she thought of him. She thought of the way he looked at her without flinching, the way he held her hand like it mattered, the way he never asked her to be anything other than exactly who she was. On the fourth day, Daniela walked into the living room and tossed her a flyer. "They're looking for volunteers at the riverfront. Community center. You want to do something with all that restless energy of yours? There's your chance." Caroline unfolded the paper. Art supplies, creative workshops, mentorship programs for kids. It was a place for people who had nowhere else to go. People who needed to feel seen. She went the next morning. The center was nothing fancy, converted. From an old church basement with peeling paint and flickering lights. But it pulsed with life. Children ran through the halls, their voices filling the air with chaos and light. Volunteers hustled in all directions, organizing boxes, sorting books, handing out meals. The director, a kind-eyed woman named Nia, looked Caroline over with a quick scan of her soul. "You any good with a paintbrush?" Caroline hesitated. "Better, with a pencil." "You just need to be better than the kids," Nia smiled. "You'll do fine." They placed her with a group of 3rd and 4th graders, most of them wide-eyed and full of energy. She spent the day teaching them how to draw, hands and faces, how to use color to express feeling, how to make something beautiful out of mess. She watched their eyes light up as they made mistakes, laughed through them, and kept creating. It was the first time in a long time she felt needed in a way that wasn't transactional. When the day ended and the sun dipped low over the Colorado River, Caroline stepped outside and sat on the steps of the center, her clothes stained with chalk dust and acrylic. Her heart felt strangely still. Not numb, not empty, just calm. She didn't hear the car at first, only noticed it when she felt the weight of eyes on her skin, a sleek black vehicle silent as a shadow parked across the street. Lucas leaned against the hood, hands in his pockets. She didn't move. Neither did he. After a long minute, he crossed the street, slow, deliberate. "You look different," he said when he reached her. "So do you," she replied, standing up. He looked down at the paint on her hands. "Teaching art?" "For now." "Are you happy?" I think so, Lucas nodded. I wasn't sure if I should come. Then why did you? His eyes met hers. Because I needed to see for myself. She didn't ask what he meant. The meaning was already sitting between them. I didn't come here to pull you back, he added. I just needed to know you were okay. I am. They stood like that for a while, the city moving behind them, the silence holding what their words could not. You look good, Lucas, she said softly. So do you. She stepped forward, reached out and touched his hand once, lightly, briefly. Thank you. For Charleston. For being there. For not pretending. He gave her a small smile. That's the one thing I never had to pretend with you. He didn't ask her to leave with him. He didn't offer promises or apologies. And for the first time, Caroline realized that love didn't always arrive with fireworks or declarations. Sometimes it arrived quietly, standing on a sidewalk in Austin, holding nothing but truth. Lucas left without a backward glance, and she watched him go with a heart full of clarity. This chapter was hers to write. Not as someone's date, not as someone's past, but as a woman who had dared to step into the light and find out who she could be without permission. Caroline turned back toward the community center, where laughter still echoed inside, and she walked forward. That night, Caroline couldn't sleep. Her body was exhausted. Every muscle tender from crouching beside children all day, from lifting boxes, from scrubbing dried paint off the tile floor. But her mind refused to settle. She lay on the old couch in Daniela's living room, wrapped in a throw blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and old memories, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow, lazy circles. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Lucas. Not just the image of him standing beside that car, but the way he looked at her, as if seeing her in that setting answered something he hadn't known he'd been asking. He hadn't judged the modest center or her paint-smeared jeans. He hadn't seemed disappointed or confused by her decision to walk away from everything their world had offered. He had simply accepted it, accepted her, and that felt like something sacred. She reached for her journal, one she hadn't touched since long before Savannah, before the wedding, before everything, and began to write. Not about Lucas, not about Nathan or her mother or the endless decisions that had broken her into so many versions of herself. She wrote about the little girl named Elise who had drawn a picture of her mother with wings. About the boy who said art class was the only hour he didn't feel like a mistake. About the way Nia had squeezed her hand when she left, whispering, "You were meant for this." Tears came then, quiet ones, not from sadness but from release. It had been a long time since she felt like she was in the right place, doing the right thing. The next morning, the center was buzzing even before she arrived. 2 new volunteers had joined, both retirees, full of jokes and stories. A local news outlet had caught wind of their program and sent a photographer. Naya handed Caroline a new supply order form and asked if she'd consider helping plan a fundraiser. Me? Caroline blinked. You have a good eye. You know how to speak to people. And most of all, they trust you. Caroline hadn't been called trustworthy in a long time. Not by anyone who didn't want something in return. So she said yes. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of planning meetings, art sessions, and late-night calls with hospitals about her mother's next round of tests. Daniela had softened, a little, occasionally leaving a sandwich on the kitchen table or a folded blanket on the couch. They didn't talk about the past, but the silence between them had shifted, less heavy, more like a bridge being built slowly, brick by brick. Then, one afternoon, Caroline came home to find a package on the front step. No return label, no note, just her name in a familiar slanted scroll. She brought it inside carefully, heart thumping. Inside was a sketch pad, thick high-quality paper. Beneath it a set of graphite pencils wrapped in a navy silk ribbon. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of stationery, unmarked but instantly recognizable. It was Lucas's handwriting. You once said you lost your rhythm. I thought you might want it back. No expectations, just creation. L. She traced the edge of the note with her finger, her throat tight. She wanted to call him, to say thank you, to ask what he was thinking, feeling, hoping. But she didn't. Instead, she opened the sketch pad and began to draw. She sketched the mural the kids were working on. Then Elise with her angel mother. Then her mother, asleep in her hospital bed, hands folded like prayer. Then herself, eyes open, staring out at something just beyond the page. With every stroke, she felt herself returning to something she thought she'd left behind in childhood. The part of her that didn't just survive, but created, dreamed, reached. By the time the fundraiser arrived, she was no longer just a volunteer. She was part of the pulse of that place. She stood by the door greeting guests, accepted donations, with a practiced smile, and gave a short speech about why the center mattered. Her voice shook at first, but as she spoke of the children and their resilience, the room stilled. When she finished, the applause wasn't thunderous, but it was genuine. Lucas didn't attend. She wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disappointed. That night, after everyone had gone, she stayed behind to clean. Nia found her sweeping confetti into piles and handed her a paper cup of lukewarm cider. "You ever think of going back?" she asked. "To Savannah?" Nia shook her head. "No. To the places you built walls around. The ones you still talk to when you think no one's listening." Caroline smiled faintly. "You always know where to hit. It's not about hitting. It's about naming what's unfinished." Caroline leaned against the broom, her eyes drifting to the mural in progress across the wall. Stars and galaxies and children flying between them. "I don't know if I'm finished with him," she said quietly. "Then don't finish it yet." She didn't answer, just sipped her cider and watched the paint dry. The next morning she woke up to a message on her phone. One line. "No more silence, Caroline. Tell me where you are." "Lucas." She stared at the words, her breath caught between ribs. She didn't reply right away. She dressed slowly, heart full, hands trembling. She looked in the mirror and saw herself as she had always hoped to become. Not flawless, not famous, but whole. When she finally typed out her reply, it was only 2 words. "I'm ready." And she meant it. Lucas arrived in Austin 2 days after she sent the message. He didn't text ahead or send a driver. He came himself in a dark, unassuming car that blended into the soft hum of the morning traffic. Caroline spotted him from the community center's front window, where she'd been cutting shapes for the children's mural with Elise. The child saw the shift in her expression. "Is that someone important?" Caroline folded the scissors quietly. "He might be." Lucas didn't approach the building right away. He stood by the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the brick exterior like it was a puzzle to be solved. When she stepped outside, he looked at her the way he always did, steadily, like she wasn't something to be admired but understood. Neither of them spoke for a beat. Then she said, "You found me. I never stopped looking." She nodded once. "Come in. I want you to see where I've been." Inside, the children were mid-project, glitter and glue sticks everywhere. Lucas moved through the chaos with careful restraint, a man clearly unused to such unscripted energy. But he didn't flinch. He crouched beside a boy building a spaceship from cardboard, asked thoughtful questions, complimented the child's imagination with genuine interest. Naya watched from across the room, arms folded. Later, she pulled Caroline aside. "He's the one, isn't he?" Caroline's lips parted, then closed again. "He's trying to be. Good. Because you deserve someone who doesn't just watch you shine, but builds the light with you." That night, they sat on the rooftop of the center, where Caroline had often come to be alone. The stars were faint in the Austin sky, but the silence felt soft between them. "You didn't owe me anything," she said finally. "I know. But you came anyway." "I came because I had to." Lucas shifted, his gaze falling to the worn wood beneath their feet. "I kept thinking, if I gave you space, I'd be protecting you. That your silence meant closure. But silence isn't peace, is it?" She shook her head. "No. It's just waiting dressed in a different name." He turned to her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes. Something stripped of performance or pride. "I've built everything on the belief that people only stay when you give them reasons. Power, security, control. But with you, I couldn't offer any of that. You never wanted it." "I wanted you," she said simply, "and that terrified me." They sat like that for a long time, letting the quiet name the truths they hadn't. In the days that followed, Lucas stayed, not in hotels or penthouses, but in a rented 1-bedroom apartment near the center. He showed up early, helped unload supplies, fix broken chairs. He listened when the kids talked, even when the stories didn't make sense. When a boy named Jordan burst into tears after failing to draw a dinosaur, it was Lucas who sat beside him, drawing terrible reptiles until the boy laughed again. Caroline watched him slowly melt into this life. Not flawlessly, not without awkwardness, but with effort, with intention. It was a side of him the world never saw, the man who didn't need headlines or polished armor. The man who could stand in a room full of noise and still see the one person who mattered. One evening, after the kids had gone and the volunteers were cleaning up, Caroline brought out a canvas she'd hidden behind her locker. She set it on an easel in the middle of the room, heart-thudding. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Something I've been working on." It was a painting, not abstract or symbolic, but deeply personal. It showed a woman standing on the edge of a city, her hair wild in the wind, paint on her hands and fire in her eyes. Behind her was a man, not holding her, not overshadowing her, but standing beside her. Ready, waiting. Lucas said nothing for a long time, then he stepped closer. "Is that me?" "It's us," she said. "Not the version we sold to the world, the version we had to fight to earn." He touched the edge of the canvas, his voice thick. "Caroline, I want to build something real with you. Something messy and human and honest. I don't care where it starts. I just want to start." Her eyes softened. "We already have." Later, that night, as they walked the quiet streets of Austin, hands intertwined, Caroline realized something. Love wasn't the grand gestures or perfect timing. It wasn't sweeping into someone's life to save them. It was showing up after the fire. It was picking up the pieces and saying, "I see who you are and I'm not afraid of it." Lucas stopped walking. "Come back with me." To Savannah? To anywhere. To everything. Not as someone in the background. As a partner. Caroline looked up at him, her smile slow and certain. "I will," she said. "But we do it differently this time. No pretending. No roles. Just us." He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. "That's all I've ever wanted." And under the soft pulse of the city lights, they kissed. Gentle at first, then deeper, like a promise finally kept. This time, neither of them would run. The return to Savannah felt different this time. Not like retreat or surrender, but like choosing to walk back into a place with both eyes open. Caroline Rivera didn't arrive in secret. She didn't sneak through side doors or lower her head as she had so many times before. She stepped off the train holding Lucas Blackwood's hand, her suitcase trailing behind her, her spine straight. This wasn't a beginning, not exactly. It was a continuation. Of healing, of truth, of claiming what had once felt unreachable. Lucas had offered to arrange something grand, a formal re-entry into their old lives, into his world. But Caroline said no. She didn't want press releases or elaborate gestures. She wanted to come back quietly under her own name on her own terms. They stayed in his penthouse for a week. Lucas had kept the space untouched since she'd last been there. The books, the artwork, even the bouquet that had long since dried in its vase. She spent the first 2 days rearranging furniture, opening windows, clearing space. Not just physically, but emotionally. It had to feel like theirs, not like a monument to everything they had endured. Lucas adapted with surprising ease. He didn't resist the changes. He simply asked questions. "Would you rather the sofa face the light? Should we put your sketches here? Do you want to host dinner this week or next?" It wasn't about decoration. It was about invitation. Still, Caroline knew she needed more than just cohabitation. She needed purpose. She needed roots that were hers. That's when the idea came. Sudden and insistent. Like a heartbeat. The Rivera Art Studio. She didn't call it a gallery. She didn't want something that felt distant or elite. She wanted a space where kids from neighborhoods like the one she grew up in could come after school, pick up a pencil or a paintbrush, and believe in something bigger than their circumstances. Lucas didn't offer to fund it, not at first. He simply listened. Listened as she mapped it out in the journal she'd carried since Austin, where she drew potential layouts, listed materials, scribbled names of possible mentors. She worked late into the night, sometimes forgetting to eat, eyes lit with something Lucas recognized and had missed, her fire. Then one morning, she found the envelope on the kitchen counter. No words, just an address. When she arrived, her breath caught. It was a storefront, tucked between a coffee shop and a bookstore near Savannah's Arts District. The windows were dusty, the wood faded, but the bones were strong. She could see it instantly. Children's art in the windows, open doors, laughter in every room. She turned to Lucas, speechless. "It's a lease," he said. 1 year paid in advance. "If you want it." Caroline blinked back tears. "Why didn't you ask first?" "Because I knew you'd say no." "And why did you do it anyway?" "Because I believe in you." 3 weeks later, the studio opened. The first day, only 4 children came. 2 were shy, barely speaking. 1 girl hid behind her brother the entire time. But Caroline welcomed them like they were royalty. She showed them where the brushes were, let them pick their own. Music, taught them how to mix colors from nothing. By the end of the week, there were 10 students. By the end of the month, 23. Lucas came by often but never hovered. He stayed in the background fixing a broken shelf or restocking snacks. The kids took to him slowly, some drawn to the mystery, others to his gentle steadiness. One boy asked if he was a teacher. Lucas had laughed softly and said, "No, just a janitor," which delighted them even more. Caroline watched him become part of the rhythm. Not the centerpiece, not the provider, just part of the hum of this new life they were building. But not everything was smooth. Savannah hadn't forgotten who Lucas was, or what his name carried. The tabloids still followed him occasionally, still printed photos of them together, speculated on their relationship, analyzed her outfits. And there were whispers, even in the arts community, about whether Caroline's success was hers or borrowed. One afternoon, after a particularly sour article painted her as a billionaire's project, she sat in the studio long after closing, staring at the drying paintings on the wall. The words shouldn't have mattered, but they did. They clung to her skin, crawled into her chest. Lucas found her there, silent and still. "They don't know you," he said. "They think I'm pretending again." "You're not." "Maybe part of me still is," he knelt beside her. "Pretending is what we did at that first wedding. What you're doing now, that's living." She looked at him, her throat tight. "What if they're right? What if this studio only exists because of you? Then let it. Let it exist. Let it grow. Let it help people. Who cares how it started? You made it matter." She closed her eyes. "I just want to earn it. You already have." They sat there in the dim light, surrounded by drying art and echoes of laughter, and she finally believed him. The next day, she framed the article and hung it in the studio bathroom with a sign that read, "Let them talk. We're busy making beauty." The children loved it. So did the volunteers. And so did Caroline. In time, the whispers faded. What replaced them was louder. Parents telling other parents, students returning with friends, local artists volunteering their time. The studio became not just hers, but a home for many. Lucas came in one evening holding a wrapped package. "What is it?" she asked. He handed it to her, quiet. Inside was a plaque. Polished wood, engraved lettering. The Rivera Art Studio, founded on courage, built on love. Caroline didn't speak. She just reached for him and he held her. There were no more questions. Only answers unfolding slowly like paint on canvas. And they were both ready. The morning light in Savannah had a way of softening everything it touched. It filtered through the windows of the Rivera Art Studio, casting long golden streaks across canvases, paper scraps, and half-clean palettes. Caroline stood in the center of it all, barefoot, her apron dusted with pastels, watching the quiet stirrings of a place that had finally found its rhythm. It had taken months of uncertainty, grit, and hope, but the studio was no longer just an idea. It was real, breathing, alive. The children would arrive in an hour. The volunteers had already started filing in with coffees and easy laughter, their familiarity with the space and one another marking the transformation of something once fragile into something indelible. This wasn't just a center for art anymore. It had become a center for belonging. Lucas walked in without knocking. He never did these days. He carried a small brown box under one arm and a familiar glint in his eye. Mischievous, quiet, but purposeful. Caroline raised an eyebrow at him but didn't ask. "I brought something for the wall," he said, his voice low and even as always, but touched with warmth. She stepped forward. "More motivational plaques?" He smirked. "Not quite." He set the box down and pulled out a framed drawing, one of Caroline's early sketches from Austin. It was a messy but vibrant piece, a blend of children's faces drawn in exaggerated expressions, a skyline fading into stardust, a single pair of hands holding it all. She had forgotten she'd even left it behind. "You kept this?" "I framed it the day you sent your first-class photo," he replied. "It reminded me of the moment I knew you weren't coming back for me. You were coming back for yourself." Caroline touched the glass gently. "And you never said anything. You needed to find your way here on your own." She leaned into his chest, his arms wrapping around her. "You always say the right thing." "Only with you," he murmured. Later that day, after the children had gone and the studio had quieted again, Caroline hosted her first community exhibition. It wasn't fancy. There were no catered hors d'oeuvres or press releases, just folding chairs, mismatched picture frames, and paper name tags handwritten in marker. Parents came with wide eyes and proud smiles. Local artists mingled with wide-eyed kids, giving tips and encouragement. Luca stayed at the back, watching her command the room, not with authority, but with presence. She moved from person to person, remembering names, asking thoughtful questions, making each child feel like a star. Toward the end of the night, as she helped stack cups and tidy paint stations, a woman approached her. She had kind eyes and a softness that suggested she knew how hard it was to make something from nothing. "Caroline," she said gently, "I just wanted to say thank you. My daughter never felt like she belonged anywhere until this place. Now she wakes up excited to come. You've given her more than art. You've given her belief." Caroline didn't know what to say. She simply nodded, throat tight, and squeezed the woman's hand. When the last guest left and the lights dimmed, Caroline sat on the studio floor with her knees pulled to her chest. Lucas sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Did you ever think," she asked softly, "that a lie would bring us here?" He smiled without looking at her. It wasn't a lie. It was a beginning disguised as one. They stayed like that until the streetlights flickered on outside. Then Lucas stood, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small velvet box. Caroline stared at it, unmoving. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't speak with rehearsed poetry. He simply opened it, revealing a ring unlike any she'd ever seen. Simple, elegant, understated. It wasn't shouting for attention. It was waiting, just like he had been. "I don't need a perfect version of us," he said. "I just want the real one. All the flaws, all the growth, all the mornings where we don't know what we're doing but show up anyway." Caroline's eyes shimmered. "Lucas, I'm not asking for certainty," he said, voice steady. "I'm asking for a life. With you." She didn't hesitate. She didn't need to. "Yes," she whispered. When he slid the ring onto her finger, there was no audience, no applause, just a quiet kind of forever settling between them. A few weeks later, they stood in front of a courthouse with a small group of friends and family. Daniela came, surprisingly bringing their mother, whose health had stabilized enough for travel. Maya flew in from New York. Naya beamed in from Austin via video call. The ceremony was short, heartfelt, full of laughter and imperfect vows. There were no gowns or press photographers. Caroline wore a simple cream dress. Lucas wore a blue-gray suit that Caroline had helped him pick out from a local thrift shop. When they said, "I do," there was a stillness in the room that felt sacred. Not because of the words, but because of the journey that had carried them there. Afterward, they returned to the studio. The children had decorated it with drawings of hearts, stars, and giant stick figure versions of Lucas and Caroline holding hands under a rainbow. There was cake made by one of the volunteers. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker that cut in and out every few minutes. It was perfect. That night, when they finally slipped away into their quiet apartment, Lucas held her close and said, "This doesn't feel like the end of anything." "It's not," Caroline replied. "It's the beginning. For real this time." She laid her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat beneath his skin. It was a rhythm she'd once feared she'd never hear again. But now it pulsed with the promise of all that was still to come. Love, she had learned, wasn't about grand gestures or flawless narratives. It was about showing up, about truth, about two people choosing each other every single day, even when it was hard, even when the world misunderstood, even when it didn't make sense on paper. Caroline Rivera was no longer a shadow in someone else's story. She was the author now, and the pages ahead were hers to write. In the tapestry of Caroline Rivera's journey, we witness more than just a love story. We witness the triumph of authenticity over pretense, the power of second chances, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild one's life with purpose and heart. Caroline's transformation from a woman hidden behind hotel uniforms and heartbreak to a visionary who inspired a community is a testament to the resilience that lives within all of us. She didn't wait for permission to dream. She didn't let her past define her future. Instead, she chose to believe, first in herself, and then in the kind of love that doesn't save you, but stands beside you as you save yourself. Through Caroline and Lucas, we're reminded that healing isn't a single moment. It's a series of small, often difficult choices: to forgive, to let go, to trust again. Their relationship defied the script of billionaire romances. It wasn't about power or perfection. It was about honesty, growth, and the beauty of building something lasting out of what once felt broken. In a world so obsessed with appearances, their story dares to suggest that the most valuable love is the one rooted in truth, shared vision, and daily commitment. This story carries a message not just for romantics, but for anyone standing at the crossroads of fear and possibility. It says, "You are not your mistakes. You are not the version of yourself others fail to see. You are capable of rising, of creating, of loving deeply, even after the world tells you it's too late." So if you felt something while reading, hope, joy, courage, even tears, then this story has done its job. Let it remind you to fight for your voice, for your passion, and for a love that feels like home. If this journey moved you, inspired you, or simply made you believe again in the power of reinvention, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps fuel more heartfelt stories just like this. Stories of resilience, passion, and the kind of emotional depth that stays with you long after the last line. Subscribe now and be part of a growing community that believes in stories that matter. We promise, this is only the beginning.